What happens when a 46-year-old man, whose wrists are mangled with arthritis, whose body has endured more punishment than almost anyone else in hockey history, and whose era was thought to be long over, decides he isn't finished? By the early 70s, the game had already moved on. Bobby Orr had taken over as the face of hockey. The new generation was here, and Gordie Howe was supposed to be a relic of the past. After all, what more did he need to prove? 4 Stanley Cups, 6 MVPs, 6 scoring titles. Over 20 years as the most feared and respected player in the league. He was already in the Hall of Fame. His number was legendary. The chapter was written. At that point, the story should be over, right? At an age when most men are worried about bad backs and receding hairlines, Gordie laced up his skates again. Not to coast, not for a farewell tour, but to dominate. And then the unthinkable happened. Against professionals half his age, in some cases literally younger than his own sons, Gordie Howe put up 100 points in a single season. So how did a poor farm kid from Saskatchewan, a boy who grew up using tree branches for sticks and frozen ponds for rinks, rise to become one of the most complete hockey players the sport had ever seen? To answer that, we have to rewind to where it all began. Gordie Howe was born on March 31, 1928, in the tiny farming community of Floral, Saskatchewan, during the depths of the Great Depression. His family soon moved to Saskatoon, where young Gordie would learn the values that would define his absurd career. The Howe family had little in terms of material wealth, but they had an outrageous amount of work ethic and determination. Ab Howe, Gordie's father, worked whatever jobs he could find. Concrete work, construction, hauling freight. Anything that paid enough to keep the family fed. From his earliest days, Gordie understood that nothing came easily. Every dollar was earned through sweat and perseverance. Every meal was the result of hard labor. That mindset forged a work ethic that would become legendary in professional hockey. The harsh Saskatchewan winters that others might have seen as obstacles became Gordie's training ground. His first pair of decent skates weren't from a hockey shop, but from a neighbor's collection of thrown-away equipment, odds and ends that other families didn't need anymore. Gordie stuffed those oversized skates with thick wool socks and spent every possible moment on the ice. The form wasn't pretty in those early days, but the engine was already there. Out on those frozen ponds with no referees and no rules, Gordie learned to protect the puck through sheer determination and physical presence. He found out that efficiency of movement was crucial when you might skate for hours in the brutal cold. Every stride had to count. Every move had to serve a purpose. This practical approach to the game, out of necessity rather than coaching, would later become his secret weapon. While other players relied on pure speed or flashy moves, Gordie developed an efficient style that conserved energy while maximizing effectiveness. At 15 years old, Gordie's raw talent had already caught attention beyond Saskatoon's frozen ponds. He got an invitation to attend a New York Rangers tryout camp in Winnipeg, a journey that required taking a train hundreds of miles from home, farther than the shy farm boy had ever traveled. Showing up at camp, Gordie was overwhelmed. Unlike the other prospects who arrived with complete sets of professional equipment, he was still using borrowed and mismatched gear. He literally had to watch other players suit up, trying to learn the right way to get dressed without looking lost. The Rangers scouts were intrigued by what they saw. This powerful young man from Saskatchewan had an unusual combination of size, skill, and toughness that couldn't be taught. However, nothing materialized from the tryout. Whether due to organizational oversight, budget constraints, or simple bad luck, the Rangers failed to follow through on their initial interest. It would prove to be one of the most costly decisions in franchise history. Detroit Red Wings scout Fred Pinckney was paying attention. He arranged for Gordie to attend a Red Wings camp, and the organization immediately recognized his potential. Detroit quickly secured his rights, and within 2 short years, an 18-year-old Gordie Howe was taking his first shifts as a professional hockey player in the National Hockey League. His NHL debut came on October 16, 1946, against the Toronto Maple Leafs. In that very first game, the young right winger found the back of the net, scoring his first NHL goal and showing the hockey world that he meant business. A new force had entered professional hockey. At first, he wore number 17, but when number 9 opened up the next season, he didn't choose it because he thought it looked cool or for any superstitious reasons. Instead, he found out that lower jersey numbers were assigned lower berths on the team's train cars during road trips. Number 9 meant a more comfortable sleeping arrangement, which translated to better rest and better performance. The most iconic number in hockey history began as a simple travel hack. Gordie's impact on the NHL was immediate and undeniable. He wasn't a player who dazzled with silky dangles or flashing plays. Instead, he solved problems on the ice with outrageous effectiveness. He would lean into D-men, roll a shoulder to create space, slide the puck underneath an opponent's stick, and step through the gap he had created. Other teams found out quick that there was no easy way to defend against Gordie Howe. If they challenged him with aggressive physical play, he would stay low and use his leverage to keep control. If they tried to play him defensively, they'd run into the elbows that became the stuff of legends. Gordie wasn't just skilled. He was the original complete player, able to adapt his game to exploit whatever strategy teams tried against him. But 1950 would test Howe's resilience in ways no one could have imagined. During a playoff game against the Toronto Maple Leafs, a huge hit sent Howe headfirst into the boards. So big it fractured his skull, needing emergency brain surgery at Hartford Hospital in Detroit. For hours, his life hung in the balance. Doctors worked to not just save his hockey career, but his life. The injury would have ended most careers damn near right away. Instead, it seemed to unlock something even more terrifying in Gordie Howe. When he returned the following season, he dominated. He won the 1950-51 Art Ross Trophy as the league's leading scorer, finishing 20 points ahead of the next closest player. It was as if breaking his head had somehow made him better, revealing a competitive drive that went against medical explanation and hockey logic. The near-fatal injury became the foreshadowing of the comeback that would happen more than 2 decades later. The 1950s belonged to the Detroit Red Wings, and the Red Wings belonged to Gordie Howe. Detroit put together what they called the production line. Howe on the right wing, Sid Abel at center, and Ted Lindsay on left wing. And that line did exactly that, produced. The Red Wings snagged Stanley Cup championships in 1950, 1952, 1954, and 1955, establishing a dynasty that dominated the NHL. During this period, Detroit finished first in the regular season standings for 7 consecutive years, a display of sustained excellence that remains remarkable even by today's standards. Around that time, Howe claimed 6 Hart trophies as the league's most valuable player and 6 Art Ross trophies as the leading scorer. It's also important to understand the context of Howe's scoring achievements during this era of hockey. This was a 70-game season in a 6-team league where defensive systems were tough as nails, and although goalie equipment was minimal, tendies were pretty frickin' skilled. High-scoring games were rare, making Howe's offensive production even more impressive. He didn't put up video game goal totals like some players in later, higher-scoring eras, but he controlled every aspect that led to scoring opportunities. Probably most importantly, Howe's greatest weapon was his ability to possess the puck. His square-shouldered stance and exceptional balance made it nearly impossible for other teams to separate him from the puck legally, and his reputation for physical retaliation made illegal attempts barely an option. By the early 1960s, Howe had become the first player in NHL history to reach 1,000 career points, a milestone that seemed almost mythical at the time. But the most absurd stat of his prime was his consistency. He finished in the top 10 in league scoring for 21 consecutive seasons, and within that span, he placed in the top 5 for 20 consecutive seasons. After 25 seasons in the NHL, Gordie Howe's body was sending clear signals that his playing days were numbered. His wrists, in particular, had become a pretty big problem, with arthritis making it tough to handle his stick with the precision that had defined his career. The decision to retire following the 1970-71 season seemed inevitable. In 1971, Howe officially announced his retirement from professional hockey and was immediately fast-tracked into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1972, an honor typically reserved for players who had been retired for at least 3 years. The hockey world recognized that Howe's contributions went way beyond normal waiting periods and induction procedures. Detroit offered him a front office position, hoping to keep their greatest star within the organization. Howe accepted, thinking that his competitive fires could be satisfied through executive responsibilities and organizational leadership. He was wrong. The transition from ice to boardroom was a lot tougher than anyone had anticipated. While Howe was smart and capable, the pace of office work couldn't match the adrenaline of competition. Paperwork couldn't replace the rush of a tight third period. The man who had thrived on solving problems at game speed found himself restless and unfulfilled. Most people assumed that Howe simply missed playing hockey, but there was more to the reality than that. What he missed was the intellectual challenge of high-level competition, the split-second decisions, the strategic adjustments, the physical and mental demands. No boardroom could provide the oxygen that came from meaningful competition. This restlessness would prove to be the spark that ignited the most remarkable comeback in sports history. The fuse wasn't lit by nostalgia, but by the fundamental need to compete at the highest possible level. In 1973, the upstart World Hockey Association was desperately seeking credibility and star power to compete with the established NHL. The Houston Aeros, one of the WHA's franchise operations, put together a strategy that was either brilliant or insane, depending on your perspective. The Aeros exploited a loophole in junior hockey regulations that allowed them to draft players who had received stipends for their junior careers, technically making them professional players eligible for the WHA draft. Using this controversial interpretation, Houston selected Mark Howe, age 17, and Marty Howe, age 19, Gordie's teenage sons who had been playing junior hockey. The selection of his sons started an uproar in the hockey world. Other teams protested. Junior hockey officials complained, and the NHL questioned the legality of the move. But the WHA, desperate for attention and legitimacy, allowed the selections to stand. Then the Aeros made their ultimate move. They approached Gordie Howe with an offer that no NHL team could possibly match: the opportunity to play professional hockey alongside his own sons. For a man who had been struggling with retirement and missing the competitive fire of elite hockey, the offer was more than appealing. In one of the wildest moves in sports history, Gordie Howe came out of retirement at age 45 to join his sons as a professional hockey player. The decision sent shockwaves through the sports world. Critics questioned whether a 45-year-old man could compete with players young enough to be his children. Skeptics wondered if this was just a publicity stunt that would embarrass a legendary career. The answer came quickly. The 1973-74 season with the Houston Aeros wasn't just a successful comeback. It was a redefinition of what was considered possible in professional sports. At age 46, Howe put up 100 points that season and, as a result, was awarded the Gary L. Davidson Award for Most Valuable Player. 2 seasons later, the award was renamed the Gordie Howe Trophy in his honor. Let that achievement sink in. A 46-year-old man who had been retired for 2 years returned to professional hockey and immediately became the league's most valuable player. He scored 100, 99, and 102 points in his first 3 seasons with the Aeros in 1973-76, establishing himself as the league's most dangerous offensive player. How did this even happen? It wasn't because Howe was flying past kids half his age. No, that wasn't his game anymore. He beat them with something even deadlier: brains. Howe had mastered the art of hockey chess. He didn't waste energy chasing plays. He lived in the right spot at the right time, turning the game into a waiting trap. And when the window opened, that's when he'd unleash a burst of power that players 20 years younger couldn't stop. It wasn't about being the fastest. It was about being the smartest guy on the ice. His game became a masterclass in efficiency. While younger players chased the puck around the rink, Howe positioned himself where the puck was going to be. While opponents focused on complicated plays and flashy moves, Howe executed simple, effective strategies that generated consistent results. And Gordie Howe accomplished all of this while playing on a line with his sons Mark and Marty. This wasn't a publicity stunt or a charity case by the Aeros. Mark Howe was already demonstrating the skills that would eventually earn him induction into the Hockey Hall of Fame. And Marty was a legitimate professional player in his own right. The 3 Howes formed one of the most effective lines in professional hockey, combining Gordie's experience and intelligence with his son's youth and energy. The Houston Aeros won the Avco World Trophy as WHA champions in both 1974 and 1975, with Gordie Howe serving as the driving force behind both championship runs. The Howe family's impact extended beyond league play into international competition. In 1974, the WHA organized Team Canada to compete against the Soviet Union in a series that received far less attention than the famous 1972 Summit Series, but was equally significant from a hockey development perspective. Playing for Team Canada at age 46, Gordie Howe recorded 7 points in 7 games against the sophisticated Soviet hockey system. Howe was competing at the highest level of international hockey and producing at a point-per-game pace against some of the most skilled players in the world. The sight of a father playing alongside his sons on the same national team was unprecedented in hockey history. Gordie, Mark, and Marty Howe represented 3 generations of hockey excellence playing together against the most advanced hockey system on Earth. It was a sports story that seemed fake, yet it was happening in real time on international ice. And of course, this international success further validated Howe's comeback, proving that his effectiveness wasn't limited to the WHA, but translated to the highest levels of world competition. At an age when most men were beginning to think about retirement from regular careers, Gordie Howe was representing his country in international hockey competition. When the Howe family showed up in Houston, the city had no hockey tradition and close to no understanding of the sport. Houston was known for oil, cattle, and eventually space exploration, but hockey seemed as foreign as skating in the desert. The transformation was absurd. In 1975 and 76, the Arrows drew over 9,000 a night, more than the NBA's Rockets in the same arena. The Howes had created a hockey culture in one of America's least likely hockey markets, proving that compelling players and winning hockey could attract fans anywhere. The style of hockey that Houston played under the Howe influence was perfectly suited to winning over new fans. It combined Southern hospitality with Northern precision, clean breakouts, relentless forechecking, and strong net front presence. The Arrows' success wasn't just measured in championships and attendance numbers, but in the lasting impact they had on hockey in the American South. The model they established would influence hockey expansion for decades to come. When business and financial pressures eventually forced changes in Houston, the Howe family moved to the New England Whalers, where Gordie continued to demonstrate that his comeback was sustainable, not just temporary. In New England, Mark Howe made a position change that would define the rest of his career, moving from forward to defense. This transition showcased the hockey intelligence that ran in the family. Mark recognized that his skills and vision could have greater impact from the blue line, and he quickly developed into one of the WHA's premier defensemen. This positional change also benefited Gordie's game significantly. Having Mark anchoring the defense meant that Gordie never had to worry about defensive breakdowns or weak transition play. Mark's speed and vision from the back end created a ton of offensive opportunities, while his defensive reliability allowed Gordie to focus entirely on offensive creativity and production. In 1979, 4 WHA teams merged with the NHL, and the New England Whalers became the Hartford Whalers, bringing 51-year-old Gordie Howe back to the league where his legend had been built. Again, this wasn't a ceremonial return or a farewell tour. Howe played all 80 games of the 1979-80 season, recording 41 points while continuing to play his physical, high IQ style of hockey. To put this milestone in perspective, finishing the season with 41 points meant Howe outscored 75% of the league's players at age 51. He was putting up numbers that would be respectable for players half his age. The 1980 NHL All-Star Game was held in Detroit, providing a perfect stage for one of hockey's most emotional moments. When Gordie Howe was introduced and took the ice, the ovation was so loud that he had to skate to the bench and wave to acknowledge the crowd before play could start. During that All-Star Game, Howe lined up against a 19-year-old Wayne Gretzky, creating one of hockey's most generational moments. The old master and the young prodigy shared the ice, with Howe recording an assist in a winning effort. Time seemed to bend as hockey's past, present, and future converged in a single game. 2 months later, Howe scored his 801st and final NHL goal, reaching a milestone that seemed unbreakable at the time. And the goal came while wearing a Hartford Whalers jersey, proving that greatness could stretch beyond team loyalties and geographic boundaries. And then, Gordie Howe's final NHL playoff appearance came in 1980, when he was 52 years and 10 days old, making him the oldest player ever to compete in Stanley Cup playoff hockey. The Montreal Canadiens eventually eliminated Hartford, but Howe had completed one of the most remarkable 3-act careers in sports history. Prairie beginnings, Detroit dynasty, and then the outrageous encore that extended his legend across multiple leagues and an additional decade. By the time he retired for the final time, Howe had played professional hockey in 5 different decades: the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. Howe finished his career with 975 goals and 2,358 points in 2,186 combined NHL and WHA games, establishing records for longevity and sustained excellence that seemed impossible to break. But because he was Gordie Howe, even retirement couldn't provide the final word. In 1997, at age 69, he took one 46-second shift with the International Hockey League's Detroit Vipers, extending his professional playing career into a 6th decade and creating one more impossible record. The crowd's reaction was predictable. thunderous appreciation for a man who simply refused to be bound by conventional limitations. Thanks for watching. If you want to hear the story of a flashy superstar who turned flair, power, and pure confidence into one of the greatest careers in NHL history, check out our video on Alex Ovechkin, how a showboater humiliated every team in the NHL. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop your favorite Gordie Howe moment in the comments. See you in the next one.